another great episode of Comedians in Bed. And like always, I like to give my guests a nice introduction. I found this guy while scrolling through IG, and I was surprised by what I found, man. But not really too much after I look at his clips. The guy is organized and he's doing his thing. He knows exactly what he's doing when he has the mic in his hand, and he's very stylish with it too. I mean, we got suits from Europe, we got suits from Australia. I mean, the shoes are snakeskin and everything. This guy is fly, he's flashy, and the jokes match too. Just like his setup, they're very clean, cut, and delivered right on time. All the way from Chicago. Please give it up for our next guest, Vik Pandya, everybody. Vik Pandya. Vic, what's going on, man? How you doing today?
I'm doing well, Ty. How are you, man?
Man, I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. Is it cold out there in Chicago yet?
We have a weird it's warm right now, but it's just teasing us. That's how Chicago does it, man. It's like, oh, we'll give you 60s in November, and then we're gonna kill you in 2 weeks. That's
Yeah. Vic, man, how did you come up with like your sense of style on stage when it comes to like fashion, man? I don't think I've ever seen you have a bad day.
yeah, man. I think early on I came from when I started doing comedy, I was in like the finance world, like where that kind of stuff is important, like aesthetic, appearance. And so when I started doing comedy, I treated it like a job, and I would show up to open mics in like suits. Like I didn't know what I was doing. I just thought like this is a job too. I should dress for the part. But then I quickly realized, oh, actually, comedy is like there's no dress code. Like it's actually the opposite. And this was like 6, 7 years ago, so it was actually cool to look bad. Like that was the
Yeah.
thing. But then I quickly realized, well, comedy is all about standing out. Like how can I be different? So I started kind of wearing what I would wear, like just like better stuff. Just like stuff I wear to go out, and that quickly got me in a different kind of mindset with people, because people are like, oh, that's Vic, he's a suit comedian, like he works clean. And in reality, I can work clean. I don't always work clean though, and actually I got some jokes that are ratchet as shit, but people people's perception is like, and that's kind of stuck in Chicago at least. And yeah, and I think from now with social media, with from clips and all that stuff, it all just plays a part into that, where it's like if you can look a little different and have a different aesthetic, like people will vibe with it.
Yeah, no, I like it. Sometimes you're in suits, sometimes you're in streetwear. I like how you mix and match it up a little bit. Yeah, I like that a lot. I do. I do. How long have you been in comedy?
Now I think I'm like 7-ish, 7.5 maybe at this point, 7.5 years in.
Yeah. Are you still doing your day job too?
No, so I'm full-time comedy as of like 2 months ago. So it feels good to
Okay.
finally take the plunge. I'm touring a lot, just doing a lot of corporate gigs, private gigs. So I kind of do all sorts of comedy, like clean, adult, everything in between.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So now that you're okay, so you're 2 months off. So I did look at your schedule. I'm like, dang, this dude is booked till May. Like, how do we
Yeah.
so we gonna talk about all that. All right. So how did you know it was time to make that step to go full time?
Well, the job will tell you that. They're like, "You're done. you better stop working here." So I was voluntold to leave. I was on a contract gig, so kind of like it's easier to leave those and vice versa. So they were like, contract was up, and they were basically like, "Well, we're not, we kind of are done with the project that we had you on," and they're like, if you want to look at other spots within the company and stuff like that, and other areas in the business. And I was kind of getting to a point, like, yeah, you've seen the schedule. Like I was getting to a point where I was traveling. Like I've always done like 8 to 10 shows a week in Chicago, but now with the travel, that's added a whole nother element of like work, even though you're working remotely and stuff, like you need those days to recover, like catch up on stuff, right? Social media, like there's so much stuff that goes on behind the scenes in comedy. So I got to a point where I was just like, I don't want to be doing both. So it felt right, and the job ended, and I kind of was like, let's just see how it goes without looking for another gig. And I was seeing how like my money looked too, because obviously you lose that check. But the good thing is about this time period that we're in right now is like these are the corporate holiday parties, the private events, the weddings, all sorts of things like that, which are pretty lucrative. So I usually do a handful of those a month, and those plus the comedy club. And like I'm headlining a lot more now. That's way more money. So it all kind of is happening at the same time, which is nice. I mean, I want to ride it out for a few months to see how it is, but I mean, things are going well now, so knock on wood, it just keeps getting better. But comedy is weird. You can have a good year, you can have a bad year. Ideally, though, year over year, I always have been making more money than the previous year. So that's also how I know I'm
Yeah.
like, all right, well, at least it's going up. You know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So what's been the difference between doing full-time comedy and working for someone like full-time?
Well, it honestly not too much in the sense of just because I was one of those dudes, like I'd be working at the job, like I'd be promoting myself on social media while in like a Zoom meeting. Like, I was constantly on it because, like sending booking emails, like I was just doing two things at once. And now it's nice because I can do stuff like this, so like during the day. I can do a little more of the kind of behind the scenes networking stuff, the promoting, all these other things. And also just like mentally, I think I'm in a better spot because I'm just like way more relaxed. I'm not as like stressed out, and I'm able to generate more material, I think, quickly just because I can kind of, dwell on it. And so much of comedy is like downtime and living things and experiencing them. And so like I try to do a mix of that plus like, just all the work you have to do and sit with ideas and stuff like that. So that's all helped so much. And like I'm pretty active. Like I work out every day. Like I'm a schedule oriented person. So like that just allowed me to do that like more and without being as rushed as it used to be.
Yeah, man, you in the heart of Chicago, man. Are you getting like TV offers? Are you gonna be on Love Is Blind season 4?
I mean, they already got an Indian dude. I think my spot might be taken, but the thing is, I've done some like I was in a web series that came out a few years ago. I did pretty well, and I got that just through stand up. And I've done some like acting things here and there, but I'm like a purist for stand up. Like I don't want to really
Yeah,
do
yeah,
anything else. I think if things come up that are like cool and they sound fun, I'll do it. But I'm not like I'm at the point where I'm like, you can recognize me from comedy and that's how I'm gonna get shit. Like I don't wanna I'm not auditioning, I'm not doing all this stuff for stuff I don't want. Like if you want me, you can
right.
come approach me. But and that's the stuff I've gotten has been things like that, or it's for friends and stuff I really like believe in. But for now it's like I'm busy enough with stand up and I'm happy with that.
Yeah. Now, Vic, let's go back a little bit. Tell us about the first time you got on stage and what made you get on stage. Was it a bet? Was it a dare? Did you just think you were that funny? Like, how was your first time on stage?
For me, I always wanted to do it. I was working out of college for a year. It's my first job, and I was like, let me go, like let's go just do an open mic. Like I've heard this is the way to do it. I just googled Chicago comedy open mics, and I found one, and I just went, and I didn't like have any understanding of how it worked. I was kind of just watching first, but I was like, well, I'm already here. I might as well go up. Like a lot of times, what I should have done is watched the thing and then went up maybe another time. But I was like, well, I'm here. I might as well sign up. So I signed up, and as the mic is happening, I'm like, man, this is not glamorous at all. Like this is bad. Like everyone's bombing. Like I was like, this is trash. What am I doing? I don't want to do this at all. And I quickly was like, well, let me go up and at least try. I wanted to do a loose story about like a blind date I went on, and I was like, I had like kind of the beats written out, but I didn't know how to like write comedy, didn't know how to structure it. But I was like, I have 5 bullet points. I'm gonna kind of like riff together a story, and I go up and it's like low stakes open mic, but I start the story and like this is the first time holding a microphone, like talking to a microphone, like in that capacity. And I immediately like my like throat closed up. I got nervous. Like I started freaking out because such a different perspective when you're on stage. You
Yeah.
don't realize what that's going to be like. And I had no preparation. I didn't practice that at all. I didn't do any of that. So I told like 10 seconds of the story I was going to tell. And then I kind of just like couldn't, like, I forgot the rest of it. I was so nervous. So I did like another 10 seconds and I think it was like on stage for a minute and 30 seconds total. And then I got off. Like I gave time back to the room, and it was just one of those things where I was like, oh, this is terrifying. Like I can't believe I did that. But then as most things are in comedy, like we're way harder on ourselves than, the audience necessarily. So afterwards, like other comics who were newer were also like, oh, it wasn't that bad. Like, you were still up there. Like they're encouraging. It's a good comedy is like a savage scene, but it's also everyone's going through the same shit. Like we all bomb all the time.
Yeah.
So that was kind of nice, but I was just like, oh man, I can't do this. So I ended up going to Second City and doing like the improv program.
Mm.
And that kind of helped me get more comfortable on stage. And so while I was doing improv, I was also started doing stand up again. And then I just like really was able to kind of like use the skills from improv and get more comfortable on stage and stand up. And then that kind of saved me from like probably like a year of just bombing on stage to get comfortable and like find my voice. And now I just started hitting stand up like so aggressively after like 2-3 months. I was just like every day I'd be out, and pretty much kind of never stopped till today.
So you went and you're doing open mics. People are noticing you're killing. You're starting to gain a little bit of confidence, finding your voice. And then, how did you get moved from just being an open micer to booking shows and booking like actual gigs?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one of the things like, yeah, you realize you're like, oh, I'm just doing mics, but like I need to get to this show level. But obviously you're like 2 months in a comedy, no one's booking you on shows. And the shows you do get on are like really bad bar shows, like they're basically bringers or they're not real shows. So I was like, well, why don't we like start a show? So me and a couple of friends who were also at the same level, we started the show and we were all corporate professionals, like 9 to 5ers. So our show was like, we're like, how do we make the show better? And we had like the marketing knowledge, we had like other things from our corporate jobs. So we made it the only show in like, there's not too many shows in downtown Chicago. Like there's shows like North Side, South Side, West Side, but downtown, there's only like a couple. There's not like a lot. So we're like, let's do a show downtown where all the young professionals are. We'll do it in an office building, make it cool, make it like after hours. And that's where we started and like it grew to this crazy thing. So we invited all of our friends. And because we had this big network from our corporate jobs, like a lot of people showed up. We had like 50, 60 people for the first show and it was like really fun and we produced it well. So then the second show, we're like, let's do the same thing. And now we're going to make it like even bigger. So we had like, it was a variety show. So we had like 5 or 6 stand-ups. We had like 2 improv groups, like sketch. We had all these different things, music, crazy shit. We had like 200 people at the show in like an office
Mhm.
building in Chicago. So, for independent show numbers, that's insane. Like that's like unheard of. And that was like 2 months after the first show. So then we're like, oh, this is how we got on the map, kind of noticed in Chicago. Because then people are like, what was this show? It had 200 people. Like that raises some eyebrows in the scene because no one's heard of us as comedians, but they're like, what's this production group? Like, what are they doing? And everyone wants to then be on your show. So then you start getting the opportunities that way where they're like, oh, I heard you run the show and you have a decent clip from the show as well, which is also important. When you're new, half the battle is like getting a clip, and you're doing all bad rooms. So you can't get a good clip because all the rooms are bad. But then to get a good room, you need a good clip. So it's like this conundrum, right? It's like when you don't have a job and you're like, well, I want a job, but I have no experience. But they're like, well, good luck, like get an internship, So that was one thing that helped a lot is producing our own shows. And then I got very lucky. Like this mic I was going to for like months, it was like this newer open mic. One of the guys who helped run it was a college agent. And he actually happened to rep Roywood Jr. He was his college agent at the time. And Roywood had just gotten on the Daily Show. This was like a few years ago. So he was kind of popping off, but like still new, but like doing well. So
Mhm.
this right before Roy taped his Comedy Central first hour. So he was like, Roy's in town. And he didn't tell me. He just goes, we have a comic in town we can't say who it is. It's Comedy Central comedian. Like he's going to run an hour. Do you want to do 7 minutes before him to open it? We need someone to open the show strong. And this guy was like a buddy of mine, but like I didn't know what the opportunity was. I was just like, absolutely, like it's a show. I don't care what it is, And he's like, we're gonna get it professionally recorded. And 7 years ago, it was a lot harder to get a clip than it is now. Like that was a big deal to get it professionally recorded. So put on the suit, did my hottest 7 minutes I had, And this is the thing, I had not really done a show like this where it was like packed in a bar, like 50 people in this tiny back room. So like hot
Mhm.
show, killer show from the top, So I got this incredible clip, and then I find out it's Roywood Jr., like day of the show, and I'm like freaking out because I'm a huge fan of the Daily Show. And so after the show, Roy and I like talked for like an hour, and he was just really cool and like helped me out, give me some advice. And so I got this clip and this credit of like opening for Roywood Jr. and having this clip, like a hot 7-minute clip. So I just submitted to every comedy festival with that credit and that clip, and I got into like 10 of them, like in 1 year. And
Mhm.
I also worked at United Airlines at the time. So I was on the corporate side there. So a big thing with festivals is like, yeah, they're fun and get in, but traveling is the cost, right? So
Yeah.
luckily with United, I could just travel for free. I could just go standby. So I'd like from year like 1 to 2, I like self-toured with like comedy festivals and I would just book shows around the festivals sometimes, or like I would travel for work, I'd book a show. So that helped me get good quickly because I was like, I had like 8 minutes, but I had to do like 12 or I had to do 15 because like you're the out of town comic, they're gonna give you more time, and you're from Chicago. You have this kind of like people think like you're somebody, and
Hmm.
it was funny because I was like I had to rise to the occasion. I had to write more. I had to do all these things. So year 1 and 2, I like grew so much because I just did all this stuff outside of the city while also producing our shows in the city and still having that going. So between the two, I just got on the map pretty quickly. Like people were like, oh, this guy's like pretty. He's Overroad Junior. He's had these credits and he's like doing shit. So it really was like pretty rapid when I think back on it. And then it's ever since then, it's just been kind of progressing.
Everybody says like you gotta, when you hit that 10-year mark, you find your voice, and this, that, and the third, and stuff will really start to take off. But you are crushing that, dude. So obviously you don't believe in that. So what is your logic on that whole theory?
I mean, I do believe that in some respects. Like I think I'm now like I said, 7-ish years in, and I just feel like I think it's not even necessarily 10 years in. It's I think when it's like when you start headlining consistently, because I've noticed like every year I feel like I make pretty big strides. Like you go from hosting to featuring to closing like local showcases. Then you go to like doing 45 minutes to an hour. And then you realize that's like where the growth happens is when you're doing these like bigger,
Mhm.
longer sets and you have to carry a set for like that long and like momentum and being on the road and like figuring out what jokes work. Like there's so many comedians in Chicago that only work like one area of the city and kill, but then you take them outside that area and then they bomb. And these like people have been doing it for years. So you have to realize like comedy is about, at least how I approach it. I'm like, I want comedy that I can do for everybody. Like whether it's jokes are clean, I can pull them out if I go to like a retirement home and have to do stand up at 2 p.m. or I do like a 90th birthday party. I got to have jokes that work for those people. But then I also have to have jokes like the Nasty Show at the Laugh Factory, which is like 11:30, starts at midnight, like every Friday, every Saturday in
Yeah.
Chicago. So you got to have this versatility. And I kind of realized that early on by just being on the road like that, because I was like, oh, this is very different than Chicago crowds. So I kind of changed my mindset early on. But I do believe like it does take some years. I'd say I'd say like 5 till you feel pretty, you have a better sense of who you are. I do think 10 is still some sort of milestone and mark. Like I know at 7.5, I'm feeling pretty confident, like good with my footing and my voice, but it's still hard to answer that question. Like, what is your voice? Like, what is your brand? So
Yeah.
I hope at 10, I can like have a succinct answer for that of like, here are the 3 things that make me up. But like I usually wait for people to tell me because they're like observing my content, consuming it. I'm like, well, you tell me what are the 3 things like you think I embody.
Yeah.
But I do just know from like a skill perspective, I think it takes like 5 years to get like competent, like to be a solid comedian. Um, and to start like where you're like crushing consistently, like probably in that 5 to 10 range. And then I imagine after 10, it's like you're like next level, you're just like you live, eat, and breathe it. And so I think I've hopefully jumped that journey a little bit, but I think time is just like, as like comedy, so much of this is like a time game, like just being in it and more opportunities, more shows. And you can only do so many shows in a day. So like how quickly you progress is not necessarily, because you're 3 years in. 3 years in Louisiana is different than 3 years in Chicago. Like
Yeah.
Chicago, I can get on stage like 5 times a day if I wanted to. So it's very different. So I don't think 10 is a hard and fast rule, but I'm sure there's something that happens after a certain period that you're like, oh, I'm ready with it now.
Right. One thing I've been working on right now and trying to do is get into festivals. So I've been making sure like I get tapes and stuff like that. What is like one thing you learn with being at festivals? Is it important to network? Is it important about your set? Like what does it you book the festival, but after you book the festival, then what?
Yeah. So that's a networking is a big thing for sure. Cause when you start, look at every festival, like I'm here to, have a good set. Hopefully there's industry, hopefully there's like other clubs that come and watch or whatever. But I think the other goal is these comedians that you meet there are probably going to be people that you're going to run into like 2 years down the road. Maybe you're doing a tour and you need to set up a show. Like that's how you get known around the kind of country and the scene. So definitely view it like that. View it as an opportunity for like networking. But I mean, I think the festival is do your best stuff on the shows because you're like meeting these comics. That's going to be their perception of you. And then they're going to go back to their home scene and be like, oh man, this man, Ty was so funny. Like he killed it. And so when you go a year later and your name gets brought up again, they're like, oh, wasn't that the guy at the festival who killed, like you still have that kind of like that's their first impression. So the nice thing about a festival is like, you can really just kind of no one needs to know how you're doing in your home scene as long as you show up correct at the festival. And so that's kind of nice because in Chicago, I was like, I wasn't really getting booked that much, like year 0 to 1, right? I had that Roywood thing, but like 1 and 2 is when I started getting more stuff because then in Chicago, I was just doing like my own show pretty much and maybe a couple spots here and there. And then I was just doing open mics. And then after like I would go on the road, like, oh, this guy, like, I go back from the festivals and I go back to doing like 5 minutes on a bar show in Chicago. But meanwhile, I just like closed out a show in, Denver or whatever. But like that's
Yeah.
how it works. Like the perception wasn't aligned yet. Um, and now I'm at a point where I'm doing enough local and on the road stuff. But like, it's the scene changes so quickly too. So yeah, view it as I think like all things, but I think go in with like the intention of like networking and like setting up for the future is how I would look at it.
And how should you submit tapes? Because I've been under the impression that, when I submit a tape, it should be horizontal, but then some people say vertical. And then sometimes if you have a horizontal tape, it don't look the same on social media. So like what like kind of like framing are you doing when you submit these tapes?
Yeah, I mean, for submission tapes, like 5-minute clips or whatever longer, I always go like YouTube horizontal, like the standard format. I think if they want to see like a real format, like a vertical, like go on my social media. Like I'm not submitting that as anything because first of all, that's under like 2 minutes. No one wants a submission under like 5. Like very few things are like submit less. Actually, most of the things are like 5 to 7. And then sometimes when you submit as a headliner, they're like, send me a 30-minute clip. So no way someone's watching a vertical 30-minute clip, but I would have like for submissions for like standard stuff, I would always have a horizontal. Um, it's good to have some reels that are good because you can be like, also check out, I have some shorter stuff. Like I sometimes include it as like a throwaway, like here's my submission clip. But then if you like, if you want to see some crowd work, check out these 2 clips or whatever. Like I just point to my Instagram or TikTok or whatever. So
Yeah.
it's sometimes it's there, but at that point, I feel like most people are doing that already. Like if you submit to something, they're going to like check out your social media anyway. So they're probably going to see that. But I would still have that really solid submission clip ready, like that hot 5 or whatever.
Also want to bring in so people can get a sense of what we're talking about here. I'm going to bring in just a little something, your YouTube page, so people can see. First of all, let's check out the style. Okay, let's check out the slacks. This guy is fresh.
Yeah.
All right.
This was the first time I headlined Zanies last year. So like big deal. This is my home club, one of the oldest clubs in the country. And I was like, I gotta get a suit made for this. So that's what I did. So it was fun. And it was like definitely for Zanies, that's like the classic Zanies look is like a suit, kind of a very late night. So that's what I did. And then the second time I did it was like all streetwear. So I like changed it up, which is a month ago.
Okay. All right. Let's take a look at this.
Yeah, I was running late here, so I parked illegally in front of a liquor store. And as I was getting out of my car, I saw a parking attendant about to write me a ticket. So I panicked and I just said, I own the liquor store. And she just let me leave. She just let me go. And I felt bad. What's cool about this clip too is the cutting between. Like they did that for you. Like the club did that.
Oh,
like
okay.
They put cameras in there. So I didn't even ask for that. They just like do it on the fly, they call it. So you get this cool like dynamic clip,
When you do get to clubs, they cut it for you and they just like give it to you.
It depends. Every club is different. I mean, more and more clubs are now they have video cameras there, which is great. But then sometimes it's like one single camera and it's like bad audio. But like a good club will have like a multi-cam setup. They'll also have audio from the board and like take the speaker and like they'll mix it all together. But like that's only a handful right now, but more and more are trending that direction. But more often than not, it's like a process. Like Zanies is very like up to date with it now, but they'll cut it and do it and give it to you. But some clubs will be like, all right, we got to pay like $30 to get the clip, but then they'll have someone like mix it for you. So every club is like Laugh Factory does that. Like they have a good camera, they got a guy recording, but then you have to pay him for the clip. And then that might take like a couple weeks or 3 weeks to get or something. So, if I was going to get that recorded myself, if they didn't have it, like,
yeah,
that worked out in my favor, but I knew I was doing like 45 minutes to an hour there. And I was like, oh, I want this clip because it's like, it's potentially 100 clips, which like I can cut up and use for whatever I want.
So now that you're like, okay, let's say you're on festivals or you're just building up a set that's like 30 to 40 minutes, how are you structuring your set list? Like, how are you flowing the jokes to go so it run as smoothly as possible?
Yeah. And that's when you start to realize when you start doing these longer sets, like you start to think of your bits as like, instead of like a set list, you write out like, these 10 things, these 10 lines, which are all like different jokes for a set. You're like, oh, I have like a relationship chunk. Then I have like a family chunk. Then I have like a getting older chunk. And you're like, you can only really start to see that when you have like a 30-minute, 40-minute set. Cause like otherwise it's just like bits, put together. So I try to like flow from that. I usually start off with like some, obviously also start off with like lighter stuff, quicker jokes, get the audience on your side early on. And I always like riff up top or like start about the room. Like this clip you played, that was right at the start, but right before that, I like was riffing on the crowd a little bit about there's like two bald guys in the front that are both like different races, and I was like messing with them. So I start off with a little bit of that pretty much all the time, unless I'm doing like an audition where it's like just jokes. So then I think as you go longer in the set, you start to get into maybe like heavier topics and then maybe longer shit. Like it might be a story, but then you can start to do callbacks too, which is kind of cool. You can start to like call back to other jokes. And so I try to structure it like get the laughs, earn their trust early, the audience, I mean, and then you can start to like get more crazy and say some wilder shit. But it also helps if like the audience is there to see you, because then you
Mhm.
have more of a like you have more leeway. Like when you're thinking about it, like when you're hosting a show, no one knows who you are. You're starting cold. You have to kind of earn their trust immediately and establish who you are in like 10 seconds. And then when you get to featuring, they're like, all right, well, this guy's the feature. The audiences thinks that you're somebody a little more important. And then when you start headlining, like, oh, this guy's like the headliner. This must be. And little does the audience know, half the time at a showcase, like a lot of times the best comics are up front because we're running to other shows, So like the audience doesn't know this though. They think the person's last or the best, but like for a showcase, it's all over the place. And then for a comedy club, it's like if you're the bill, then hopefully you are either the best or you're like the people are paying to see you. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's all like perception and it's all that. So be aware of those things too. Like, you don't need to rush to get an immediate laugh when you're headlining, like in the first like five, but like it is fun to get a joke off and then be like, then they settle. You can kind of see the audience like waiting to be like, oh, who is this person? Then you get the joke off, then you can kind of sit in it for a second. So that's why I always try to start off with something that like happened or some room stuff first.
Yeah, and structuring is very important. And I'm gonna tell you something. Okay, I didn't tell you this when we first started. I usually when I on my way to work, I'm either listening to gospel or smoking weed or listening to the Breakfast Club radio show. And this morning I
Mm.
listened to your comedy album and I liked it. I liked it a lot. It was the X's and Uber drivers. How
Oh
did you come
yeah,
up
yeah.
with how did you come up with this idea to like do the comedy album? And then when did you know it was time to do the comedy album?
Yeah, honestly, kind of. So in 2018, I had this two other comics we were producing a bunch of shows together. We had been doing that for a couple of years, and so we were like, oh, we've been doing these successful shows that are like people are like we're getting known for them. We should record an album, but we all were like aware that we're pretty new, we're like 3 years in. We're like we don't have an hour each, like that's too much time. But what if we put together like a really solid like 20-25 each, and then we cut it together for an hour? So we did this album, and this was a different one. This is called Friends with 401k Benefits. So this is the one that went like number one on iTunes, top 10 on Billboard. So we did it like a joint album, three of us doing like 20-25 minutes each. And then we kind of cut it together with like certain themes of like, I was talking about dating, and then Tyler, another comic, would talk about dating. Like we'd like weave it together. So it was this really cool show. We did this like self-funded, self-produced it, video and audio, and it did well. So that all came out, and that was great. But then we like a few months later, I got an opportunity to do like a 30-minute special at an independent venue in Chicago, and they were just doing it. They're like, "Well, we produce it, we promote it, we'll film it and give it to you, and you can also like get the audio." But it was mainly like video, and I just done the 20 here, but that 20 I'd worked on for so long because that was like what we were working towards for so like we knew this date was here, but this was kind of like a random like few months later. But they're like, yeah, you have like a few months to prepare, and I was like, well, I don't want to do shit from the album because I was so sick of it, and we were about to put it out, so we were like, I gotta just do something new and fresh. But the good thing about when you put something out like that is like you have stuff you're working on, but at some point you have to make a decision to like stop working on the new and just focus on getting these like jokes right for their first album. So I had all this like kind of stuff I was like half working on that when I started, I was like, oh, I can like build this into like 25, 30. And it's only in a few short months, but like I hit it with like a new passion because I was like, oh, I don't want to touch this other stuff at all. And so I kind of like, I call it like the B-side. There's like some stuff that didn't make the album. And I kind of like punched it up in the next few months and made it like, I didn't feel it was ready yet, but then after a few more months of additional work, I did. So it was like a combination of some of that stuff and then just like all the new stuff I'd been working on right after I put that out. So that's how that one came about. So, and that was like my own thing. There was no, like, I just did a 30 by myself. So, and it was really fun. Like I got to like see how like my specific fans, cause we had always been doing things up until that point as a group. So I didn't know if I had like any draw in Chicago yet. I was like, well, our production company has a draw. We have like a presence, but what about like Vik? Like, what do I have? And I was like, this is a small little venue. It's like a 50 seater. And I was like, and we sold it out. Like I invited like my parents, like for me, it was like my first solo kind of like special. And, and it was fun because I did it and I just had an extra special like in the can. So I didn't release it. I just did it and I had it and it was a great show. And then I remember during the pandemic, I was like, the other one had already come out at this point in 2019. That's the one that went #1. And I was like, I still have this other one that's all different material that no one's heard yet. And during the pandemic, you're just bored. I was like, let me take the audio from this and just drop it as a free album. And that's what I did. And that actually, like views wise and streams, is doing really well. Like, cause it's just something that people can go and watch and listen to. And it's kind of like a nice thing if people find me now through like Dry Bar and they're like, wait, we want to hear some other stuff. And then I have like 2 other albums they can go listen to. So it's like, there's just all this content. And I'm kind of glad I did it because I was like, it doesn't hurt me now. There's none of that content I'm doing now, but it's just like a bonus for people who find me. And like, they're like, oh, this is like, he's not just a clean comedian from Dry Bar. He's also got some shit about his life in this Exes and Uber driver. So yeah, I mean, that's how that one kind of came about. It was just like kind of like I said, it's a very B-sides album, but I actually really liked how it turned out.
So once you got it like recorded and mixed and all that type of stuff, what is the process of like getting it on like a streaming service?
It's actually you can do it yourself. Like Spotify lets you, create your own artist page and stuff like that. And then you use like a service called like, I think it's called like DistroKid, I think is one of them. So basically this is like a thing that you can upload the tracks to, and then it will like push it to like SoundCloud, Spotify, like it does it for like iTunes, like all of them. So that's way easier than doing each one individually, and it kind of like does all the checks for you. So you pay for that service, and then that pushes it out for you. So once I did that, I had like my stuff out there on my own, and I just wanted like stuff out there so people could listen to it during the pandemic. I'm like, I don't want to charge people. It's not for me. It was like, now this material is just like from like 2018, and this is 2020, so I was like, it's a little old now. And really that means also from like 2017 when you think about like an album, like how long it takes. So I was like, let's just put it out, see what works. And there's so much free content coming out that I was like, you can have a paywall because people are like during the pandemic just consuming content. So it's usually one of those kind of things is what I would recommend because it's like the easiest way to do it. And then people can find it through like how they find your other shit. They just Google you, like that will pop up then,
Right. Now you did the comedy album. I mean, you did the comedy album. What's the jump? Because I saw that you did Dry Bar too, and you just mentioned it. What is the jump from doing a comedy album to doing a comedy special? And what's the difference in between that?
Yeah. So an album is like audio only. So when we say album, that means it could have been video recorded, but the only thing you're putting out is the audio. So think about like Sirius XM radio, things like that. That's all audio, right? But video, when you say video, that's how we call it comedy special. So a special can also be an album, but an album can't be a special, right? If it's not, if it's just audio. So some people only when they record a special or they record an album, they don't even record video. They just do audio because they're like, I just want the audio from this. I'm going to put that out. I don't care how it looks on video. Now in this day and age that we're in now, like I'm kind of glad that I have the video from both of those albums that we did because it's nice to just go back and drop those because like now video is the name of the game, right?
Yeah.
So, but in that time, it was kind of like a split. Like specials were really only like Netflix and like a couple on YouTube. But now it's like I could technically go and drop the video on YouTube right now if I wanted to.
Yeah.
So, but so the jump to drive then, but there's like different tiers obviously of both things, right? Like an album is like you can do it self-produced, you can have like a distributor do it. Same thing with specials. Like Netflix is technically a distributor and they can produce it and stream it for you, but you can also put your special out for free on YouTube. So there is a jump, but it depends how high you're trying to go. So Dry Bar is like Netflix, but it's for clean comedy specials. So like you can't swear, can't cuss or anything, but they have 2 million subscribers on YouTube and they also have like a huge base on their app. So some of these people on Dry Bar have like millions and millions of views on their YouTube specials because the Dry Bar will put it on their page. And then as a comedian, you just get, your social medias blow up, like things like that. So I was like, oh, this is something I want to do. And they do like a new season every year. They film like, people doing 20, 25 minutes clean. And then, they put it out, they produce it, they pay you for it and they put it out. So I was like, oh, this is a good goal I have. I'm doing a lot of like corporates. I have like 20 to 30 clean that I can do. But with Dry Bar, you need like a recommendation. You need some other stuff to get it. So I tried like a year ago and then didn't get it. And then this time, like I missed the window of the season filming because they film them all in like a month. And then they release them like a year later. So I got into this round in April. So you fly to Utah, you do it in Provo. It's all Mormon people. You do 2 shows and then they cut it together and then they don't tell you when it's going to come out. Like I have friends who recorded one in October. It's still not out yet. So I got lucky. They dropped mine in August. So they dropped it a couple months ago. So only like 4 months after I'd done it. So it's like pretty good because even though some of the material is kind of older, like I had like been working the material to prepare for the special. So I like refreshed some of it, brought some stuff back. And they film it like it looks incredible. It's like well shot, it looks like a Netflix special. And so now it came down on their app and I was like pretty happy with that because now I can start using the credit and like gets me into clubs and stuff. But the best thing that they've started doing is they're sharing now on their YouTube little clips from it. So now the first clip they dropped had like 40,000 views when I last checked. So now I'm starting to get some like views on like 40,000 views on YouTube means so much more than like 40,000 on like Instagram,
Yeah.
So I'm pretty happy about that. So I'm starting to see like all of my social media go up. Like my YouTube numbers, subscribers are going up. My Instagram, my TikTok following is going up just because of these Dry Bar clips that they've been dropping. And then also because I'm pushing out my own content all the time as well.
So I've noticed that like you hit a mic like every night. So when you hit these mics, are you working on new material? Or are you working on old material? Are you mixing them in together? And then also, how are you like obviously you can get the content because you're doing it every night, but how do you decide like which one you want to push out?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I'm pretty much doing shows like almost every day. So depending on what kind of show it is, if it's like a an indie show during the week, I'm using that as like an open mic. Like I'm trying new jokes. Like I'm gonna put some old stuff in there too to make sure it's good. But like I'm testing jokes during that. So then during the weekends or during like the more like primetime type shows, I'll be doing like that plus my solid stuff. So I'm constantly doing new stuff and working it in, but I'm also like trying shit, at sometimes bigger shows too. And the nice thing about headlining is like, you can do 30 minutes and then like maybe for 10 minutes, I tell the audience, I'm like, all right, I'm going to work on new stuff now. Like, do you guys want to hear some new jokes? And then I literally will do like, sometimes we'll do it that structured. Sometimes I'll sneak it in without telling them, like, just kind of depends how I'm feeling. But so I use those as a ways to like kind of build more material. And then from like what I release, it's like, I rarely put out the whole joke because like, as you know, like people's attention span, it's like 30 seconds, 15 or whatever. So I'm just putting out like maybe a tag or like the premise. And if it's something that I'm going to put out like a bigger bit, I'm going to put out a special or something, I usually don't drop it. So a lot of the stuff I put out is like, crowd work, throwaway stuff or just like older jokes that I'm like, I'm not doing this anymore anyway. But
Hmm.
sometimes there's like topical stuff that is like relevant to now that I'm like, oh, I had a great riff about, something. I'm like, let's put that out. Like
Or
during the heat wave in Chicago, I had all these like riffs about Lori Lightfoot, our mayor, and how she like dresses terribly. And like, I was like very fun. So I put that out because it was like pertinent for the summer. And
right,
I wanted to hold on to it, but I'm like, no, this is the right move, and it was like the clip did well. Like I got a lot of feedback on it, and people were sharing it and stuff because it was like topical. So you have to kind of balance that as well. Like, do I drop it because it's trending right now? And that's kind of what you have to do as well.
I notice how you do like your fonts, you pick your colors and stuff like that. How does that go into like planning? Are you looking more so like on the number side or what's trendy or just like kind of like how you feeling for that day?
Yeah, well, now luckily I have like an editor, so obviously all the clips I'm getting either from clubs or just like people recording them, sending them to me. But then I'll take those clips and I'll like get to the clip I want. Like I want this 10 seconds here, and I'll send it to this guy who's the editor, and then he'll caption it and he'll put in some effects. Like we'll work together on that. But now he's been working with me for a while, so he kind of knows my style preferences. So
Hmm.
he's like, I have this font that's like the Netflix font. And I was like, oh, we're using that. He's like, normally you have to like pay for that. Like but he worked on something for Netflix, so he has that. Like normally
Mm.
people don't have that. So I was like, well, use that. Like I want that shit, but put that on my stuff, So
Yeah,
he's been great to work with, and I've actually like a lot of comics have been like, oh, who does your stuff? Because it's so much better when you have an editor, because like that's a huge time suck I don't have. And he's just much better at it than I would. He's much faster. Like I can do it through like Instagram's normal tools, but it just doesn't look as good. And now you're competing
right.
with people who are putting out like Andrew Schultz putting out like 4K content every day, and you're like, well, I gotta step up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. One of the things that I kind of sometimes like when you ever been like scared, like, dang, I'm not funny no more. So like sometimes like I'll like run out of, I guess, jokes. You get that anxiety
Yeah,
or whatever. And I'll go back and I'll work on old jokes and see how I can make it better if I feel
yeah.
like I'm in like in a stuck in a rut for writing or whatever. What's your process like when you feel like you can't get anything creative out, can't think of anything new, or when you do think of anything new, you're like, maybe this isn't good. Like, what is your process when you feel like stuck when it comes to writing?
Yeah, I do exactly what you said. That's one thing I do a lot is like, because sometimes you'll have like 7 to 10 days of just continuous shows, and you're like, there's no time between, no time to like really work on flesh out new stuff. You're kind of just trying shit at the show, but you're not able to like sit with it. So sometimes after that, you're like, you feel like you're in a rut. So taking a day or two to kind of just like not do any comedy and then like kind of just live some life, that usually helps, taking a day or so off. Because what you realize, like a lot of this creative process is happening when you're off stage too. So, you may say the joke, it's a new joke, and you're like, I can't figure it out. And then like a week later, it'll come to you when you're just like walking outside. And you're like, I'm not even on
Hmm.
stage right now. How did it come to me? It's because your brain is still marinating on this joke. So, but when you're not doing it, that allows you to kind of like think about it in a different way. So I've realized that. So sometimes like I'll be annoyed at doing old stuff or whatever, and I'll just like take a day. I try to take like one day off a week, and sometimes you don't have that, but try to do like 1 or 2 days here and there where I have like some period of just like not doing comedy at all, and then it usually stuff will come to me, or I'll like experience something that day where I'm like, oh, this is gonna be a joke later. Let me go like write it down, and then I'll go work on it later. But I do a combination of that. And there's also like old jokes I have, which I'm like, I know this is funny. It's just not done yet. Like I don't consider it finished. And most jokes I don't think are considered finished. Like there's jokes I'm like, this is like it hits almost every time. I put it in this column, but then there's a lot of jokes that are in this column, which I'm like 80% satisfied with this joke, but I know these are these 80%. So I'll like pluck out those to work on all the time. And then there's stuff that's like super new, but it's weird because some jokes you're just like, I've been working on this joke for like a year, technically, through different iterations. But some jokes evolve. You tell them, you haven't told in 6 months, you tell it again, you might say it differently, and you're like, oh shit, now I like the new version better. But so it's not really the same joke anymore. You've kind of evolved it on its own.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so now, Vic, you went from doing open mics and then you started doing your own shows. All right. Then you started doing festivals. Now you're starting to get in these clubs and you're in these clubs regularly. How did you go from those steps to getting in the corporate world, because that's totally different, and it's a whole different set of money too.
Yeah. Yeah. So because I was still working the corporate job while doing stand up until like a year ago, I always had like one foot in the corporate world. So when I, was like 3, 4 years in, all these like company holiday parties were happening. You realize you're like, oh, they have comedians sometimes at these things. They have like entertainment. So why not just do stand up at these? And I got on like I started getting asked from people like through work connections, like, hey, can you come be like an MC for this like gala we're having? Like sometimes it wasn't even stand up, it was like MC work or like stuff like that. But then you start to get like, you realize there's a whole nother side of this like MC, presenter, like host type duties. And then you start to realize like for holiday parties, they need someone to like shepherd the party. Like they need that type of stuff. So I started getting asked to do these kind of like through connections. And then there's like a couple websites that they're like independent gig websites, like Gig Salad is one, Thumbtack, and you can sign up on there, create a profile as a comedian, and then you can get found by all these people looking for that type of stuff. So obviously, any comedian can go create one, but if you don't have like a clean clip, because for corporates, they're like, you can't put your like late show at Friday, like saying crazy shit out there because they're not going to book you for a 2 p.m. meeting where they want like 10 minutes of comedy, So
Right.
you have to also get a clean clip, which is kind of hard to do. But once you get that, and then you start getting some like reviews, you're like, oh, I worked at this company and they reviewed you on there. You start to build up your your kind of credentials. So it's really come a long way because me and another comedian, the guy who we actually worked on the special together, we did a lot of them and we do it together. So there'd be like 30 minutes clean at this corporate lunch. So we both go together, we both do 15, and that's how we do it. And we'd be like, oh, 15 minutes, we're getting like $400 for this. We get $200 each. Like, this is crazy. Like at that time, you're making 30 to $50 a spot at a club, maybe. And that's like a lot of money. Like that was good money. And now you're like, oh, wait, I'm getting paid $200 for 15 minutes. Like, and nobody knows who I am yet. And I'm still making this money. And now it's only just gone up. Like you do weddings, you're like, you might make a couple grand or $1,000 off a wedding. You MC a wedding. And so you start to realize you're like, oh, I got to do this plus the clubs. Because if I just did the clubs, I'm not going to be able to support myself just on comedy. And
Right.
and as soon as you get out of the corporate world, you really need to do all that shit because you're like, well, I don't know, unless I want to be broke. And I don't want to downgrade my lifestyle. Like, I was used to a bougie lifestyle from my corporate job. So I didn't want to downgrade that. So I was like, I have to do all this other shit. Because some comics, they're like, I don't work clean. I don't do that. I'm not doing corporate shit. Fuck that. And you're like, all right, well, I guess you want to just live off $30 to $40 spots for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
But everyone's different. And luckily, as you start headlining too, the money goes up, like I was saying, but it's still not comparable. Like corporates are where the money's at, man.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
private.
What is considered clean? Because some may think it's not just cussing. Can you still talk about sex? Can you not talk about sex? Can you talk about race? Can you not talk about race?
Sure.
What's exactly considered clean?
Yeah, I mean so honestly for corporates it's a little bit we call it like corporate clean. So you can like allude, it's like innuendo is fine, but you can't be I was fucking her in the pussy. You can't say that, but you can be
Yeah.
we made love, like you kind of be cheeky about it and that's fine. So you can definitely talk about these topics, but you can't like be grotesque and overt with it. But then also there's another level of like sometimes the corporate will be like no politics, no race. And so then if you're like, me and you, I'm sure you talk about race. I talk about race on stage. So you have to think about your racial jokes. You're like, well, which ones do I have that are just pertinent to me and they're not like poking fun at another group? So I can
Mhm.
still do those jokes because those are about me. And so that you can say and get away with. And sometimes corporates have weird stuff like, oh, don't talk about, like I did one for like Microsoft and they're like, don't talk about anything Microsoft products or whatever. And you're like, yeah, of course. Like that makes sense. It's a little weird, but like I had a joke on like Microsoft Teams from like pandemic shows, but obviously I didn't do the joke. I just like shit on Zoom for like 10 minutes because that's like their
Yeah.
competitor. So, you start to do stuff like that. And then conversely on another show, I did the opposite. I just shit on Teams for 10 minutes and didn't talk about, talked about Zoom. So like stuff like that where they hire you, they usually give you, and you always ask, you're like, what are the stipulations? Like be really clear.
Mhm.
I always ask for like, I look at it like a movie rating. Is it like a G rated show, PG, PG 13, or R? and then that helps them because they don't also know half the time. They're like usually they say like PG or PG-13. So for
Hmm.
me that means like think about a PG-13 movie. You might say shit or ass, but you're not really saying fuck. You're not like overly. You're not showing. So it that helps me kind of think about it. And then for dry bar is like more of that. It's even cleaner, but you can definitely do innuendo. You can definitely do that, but you can't mention like drugs or alcohol at all. So even if it's
Hmm.
clean, you can't say like I got drunk. You have to say like you can't say that. So that was hard because a couple of jokes I had to tweak based on like I was drunk was like the setup, and you're like you have to say something else, or you have to just make up a new premise. So, but that
Yeah.
was specific to them, and they tell you that before you do it. But
So you're doing corporate and you're in the clubs. How are you when you book? Are the clubs booking you, or are you cold emailing these clubs and saying, "Hey, I'm available these dates. These are past numbers that I've done at other spots." Like, how are you getting into these clubs now that you're doing it full time?
yeah, it's a mix of both. I mean, it's the submission thing never ends, at any level. Like I do all my own booking. I don't have an agent, so like I have to submit to stuff. But now it's more of like if I submit to something, I usually have try to get like a recommendation of someone who's like worked the club, and then they'll be like, "Oh, Vic's like a comic from Chicago. You should have him at your spot." So that kind of helps. But I'm still, pushing myself to them. But then like in the city, clubs who know who I am will be like, "Oh, are you free this date? Like we need you for this thing." So I'm getting those locally. And then some places around the Midwest will be like, "Oh, we'd love to have you. Like we saw your clip on social media." Like sometimes new clubs will like find me from like Instagram, like kind of probably how you found me, and they'll
Hmm.
be like, "Oh, we saw your stuff. We'd love to have you out." And because then they'll look, if they find you like that, they're gonna look at your like what you've done. So then they can kind of get a sense of your resume from that. So it's a mix of both. I mean, but like that submission stuff never ends. That's continuous.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I'm finding out myself.
Man, it's
So
a
when
full time job.
yeah, it's crazy. So when you go on stage, do you feel compelled to represent brown people all over? Because I feel like comedy, man, it gives you perspective of people that we probably normally wouldn't hang around, or probably people that we didn't grow up with. So when you go up there, do you have like a sense of consciousness to represent your people, or are you just representing Vic?
Yeah. Again, I think mix of both. Like, I've done a lot of these gigs. Like, I get hired to do a lot of like Indian or brown specific shows where they're like, oh, it's an Indian wedding, right? Or then they want jokes about that. Or it's like a Indian charity. They're raising money for schools in India or something. So they're hiring you because of that. Like they're hiring you because you're
Hmm.
Indian, but they also want you to like talk about stuff that they're going to relate to. But then, as a comedian, we also want to talk about our stuff, which it may be that it may overlap, but I think you do have some like responsibility to kind of represent, but I'm also, I make it clear that it's like, I'm an individual. Like I'm talking about stuff that's important to me. But I
Hmm.
do try to like have a through line of like, this is also my perspective from like, as an immigrant, like as a brown person. So I try to have that vein throughout. And then obviously you have jokes that are like pretty on the nose about it, that you'll pull out if you need to. But when we started producing shows and still now, like one of the tenets was like booking a diverse lineup because we're doing shows downtown where most of the audience is pretty homogenous. So we're like, well, let's bring diverse talent so then we attract diverse audiences. And so that's always been like a tenet for us is to like produce diverse shows. And I mean, I think they make for better shows because like diverse lineups equal diverse audiences, which equal the best audiences. So I never want to see like all of one type of audience or performer on a show because it's just not going to be as good.
Yeah, I like when, like first minorities to go into different rooms. Like I wish we had like an Asian room or a Mexican room because it could teach
Yeah.
you to like talk to those people. So like when you are like talk to the importance of like doing different rooms. Cause I feel like some just like you were saying earlier, like some comics just stay on one side of town. When you go do these different rooms, they do make you better. So like as
Oh,
a
absolutely.
minority, when you as a minority go into these different rooms, like you're going to an all white room or something like that, how does it make you better? And then also, do you play to the audience or do you just do Vic?
Yeah, I mean, I was early on, I definitely pandered a little bit. Like, you're like, I would do like all black rooms on the South Side, and I'd be like, I'd go up and be like, all right, well, like I'm the terrorist here. Like you got to kind of do these like little jokes, and you realize though, like you don't actually need to do that. You can also just like do your own set. But it's also like fun. You can use it the other way. Like I did an all black show at the Laugh Factory like a few months ago, and it's like I was like I think the third or fourth comic up. So it was like all black comics. And I was like, I go up, I'm like, finally some diversity. Like, you know, like I go up and I was like, we get it. It's a black show, you know? So like, I was
Yeah.
just like, so addressing it, but in like a way that's obviously like, I'm an individual. I'm going to talk about my shit. So like that is a way to do it, I think, in a better way than being like I'm the Indian on the show, you know, like that kind of way. So, and it is important because, you know, as comedians, we're going to be put in situations like when you start doing the road, like you're going to be in a situation where it's all one type of person. You know, we're very lucky to live in cities where it's like pretty diverse audiences and we can do jokes that like everyone gets, but it's important to do these rooms that are one type or like quote unquote one type of room, because when you go on the road and you get put in that situation, if you have never been in that, you're going to struggle because you're like, oh, what did I do? Then now I can go back and be like, oh, what did I do in that one time? Let's try like following that path, or like, what did I see was working? Because if you don't have that, then you're like, it's like the first time you get told you have to be clean, like right before the show. And you're like, wait, like, I didn't know that. I've never done clean. And people are freaking out. You see comics being like, they're like, I have 3 minutes, maybe I can do this. I can do 3 setups. So if you're constantly doing that all the time, you never have this panic because you're like, oh, I can figure it out. Like, I'll figure it out. You know, I'm not worried about it. And so that's where
Yeah,
I'm at
sometimes
now, where I'm just doing so much of the different stuff.
sometimes I'll walk in a room, or if I'm starting to get in clubs, I'll walk into a club, I'll be like, oh shit, there's a lot of white people here. And it's just like, and sometimes I get intimidated, and I used to not, but then sometimes when you think something's going to work with a certain type of audience and it don't, it throws you off, and you kind of question yourself now, like maybe I shouldn't say it, you know what I'm saying? So how do you fight that?
Yeah, I mean, I also have been doing it long enough where I've done enough shows where I've been like pretty I think it's important to like try to figure out the audience, right? Like see what they're into or like try to plan. But then I also realize like half the time you don't know until you tell that first joke, like how they're gonna react to you, etc. So like I've been wrong sometimes where I've been like, oh, they're all white. I'm gonna do like some easy shit in, and then it turns out they're like crazy. They want ratchet shit immediately, and I was like, oh, I didn't even. I prejudged these whites, you know. So I do that sometimes where I'm like, I just have to kind of like let it happen. And I think that's what's cool about comedy is like, yeah, you may be in an all white room, but if you're the one black comic in the white room, like they may pay attention to you different when you go up there. Like you may actually have an advantage. So
Mhm.
it really like you have to try to get away from trying to like pre-plan too much. Like you start to realize comedy is so like person to person specific and so subjective that you can have like a totally different experience in the comic after you or before you. So I try to not, you know, prescribe any sort of thing to the audience until I go up. Um, and like obviously, if you start doing it, you're like, oh, they didn't like jokes about that. Probably avoid that. Like that sort of stuff is, I think, smart. Like that's just being, you know, paying attention. But
Yeah.
if you try to change your whole set, like right on the top, that might mess you up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Vic, man, as we start to wrap this up, what's like some words of encouragement that you have for any comedian that's listening out there?
Mm. I think the biggest thing I had, this is like a great quote someone told me. They're like, whenever you're writing like a joke or something, and you're like, how do I know this is like, you know, it should pass this like this criteria. Like, is it new? Is it you? And is it true? And if it hits those 3 things, that's going to be something that's like only your bit, and it's probably going to be good because first of all, it's new. It's not like an old thing you're working on. Is it you? Like, is it about you? Did it happen to you? Your experience? And then is it true? Like, is it something that you can identify with? Is something that like you believe in? So if it hits those criteria, and you start to think about every joke that you have, does it meet all of those? And if it does, you're going to have a stronger set because it's going to be specific to you versus like some topical stuff or whatever. So that's something that I try to pass on to people. Like it's a simple thing, but it's a lot harder to execute when you start to look at your set and you're like, oh shit, this one doesn't meet that, you know?
Yeah. Vic, man, tell people why they should listen to Comedians in Bed.
Well, first of all, there's you guys, I don't know if you can see this, but there's amazing cats on the screen. So it's a very relaxing podcast. You got some nice art you can observe for an hour, but also I hope it's helpful. You know, it's a podcast where I think we're trying to tell people about the ins and outs of the industry if you're interested in that, but also interested in people's stories. Like that's what's cool about comedy is like people think there's like one route to success, and you realize there's a million ways to get to the same thing. So, and everyone has their own journey and what they want. So, I think for anyone pursuing anything artistic or creative, like this is a great podcast to kind of maybe get some inspiration for whatever you're doing. It doesn't need to be comedy; it could just be like an endeavor. So, hopefully, that convinces people they should listen.
That's the goal here, man. That is the goal. Vic, man, where can people find you at?
So I'm on all social media. At Vik Pandya, VikPandya. That's on like Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. It's Vik_Pandya, YouTube. So yeah, all that stuff, content dropping all the time. Tour schedule is up there on Facebook. You can see what cities I'm coming to next. So yeah, keep an eye on. I'll probably be in your town soon.
Vic is out here doing his thing, man. He's coming to a city near you. Please check out that Facebook page to see where Vic is going to be at next. He's a busy guy, man. He's doing his thing. He's a great comic. He's a good looking guy. He's from Chicago. Ladies and gentlemen, we got Vik Pandya on the podcast. We appreciate you for joining. We'll see you guys next week. Hey, me and Vic got to go to a mic. We got to go make you guys laugh. We appreciate you
Yeah.
joining us this week. Vic, man, appreciate you, man.
Thanks, man.